Let's talk another loss for Syracuse sports.
Rough weekend all the way around.
It was, too. And if you were doing like let's hope Syracuse backdoors its way into the ACC tournament bubble watch, you were not pleased with the outcomes.
Yes. All right, so we've got Tim Leonard here to talk women's basketball, talk men's and women's lacrosse. Tough weekend all around. Where do you want to begin, Tim?
I guess let's start with lacrosse. We can work our way to basketball. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with the men, and it's a situation where they come back from losing their first road game to Maryland. You figure they're going to bounce back at home against a Harvard team that had just lost to Colgate. And all week, Gary Gate was saying these guys are good enough to beat you. Like, you got to play well.
Yeah.
And, Syracuse ends up losing by a goal. So what happened on Saturday?
Yeah, this one was definitely more in the category of inexcusable in terms of the recent two losses, this two-game winning streak. Like Maryland, the weather was wonky, and I think that favored Maryland's strategy a little bit to slow the game down. I was flying down to Duke for women's basketball, and when we took off, I was listening to Jack Gordon, who was filling in for me, and Kyle, and there were a lot of woos early on, and it's 5-0. We take off, and then we land, and the first thing I saw was like a tweet that Michael Ippoliti was in the game, and they were down by 1, and I was like, what just happened?
Yeah, right.
Like, how is this possibly? I thought I was going to land to 20-10, Syracuse is up or something, and I think what happened was Jimmy McCool struggled for the first time really this season, and they had to pull him. I mean, it wasn't just Jimmy McCool, but a lot of long-range shots were going in. A lot of shots were going low on a pretty tall goalie in Jimmy McCool, and I think they just sort of let it spiral from there. And the biggest concern with this team right now is that we're in the junior year of all these guys where it feels like they should be getting better at like late game situations and crunch time situations. And you still, for whatever reason, like some teams, when you're watching them in crunch time situations, like I harpen back to the women's basketball team last year, was just a team that you just had the good vibes every time they were in a crunch time situation. For whatever reason, this year's team, I think every fan that follows the team, anyone that's sort of covering the team would tell you, like, they just haven't really put it together or given you a lot of confidence in those situations. Now, there was the Virginia game last year where it felt like it was going to be another one of these games where they were ahead and let it go and lost it. And then they came back and made some winning plays. And that was that epic game against Virginia. I think it was 18-17 inside the Dome. So I felt like, okay, that was kind of them getting rid of that narrative, and they had some close top 5 wins last year. But even some of those wins last year, like Hopkins, they got ahead and just sort of held on. UNC, they got ahead and just sort of held on. And they have not been a very good team at playing with a lead in the last 2-3 years. So unfortunately, that kind of reared its head the other day.
You mentioned that Harvard scored on a lot of outside shots and that the defense was a little bit of an issue. You look at the final stats, Tim. Faceoffs won 28-4,
amazing.
Which it doesn't seem possible that they lost this game. Ground balls, they won by 16 in that category. So as much as the defense was an issue and they gave up 15 goals. What about on the other end of the field? Because they obviously started with a lot more possessions than Harvard did, but unable to convert as much as they probably should have.
Exactly. Yeah, to win the faceoffs 28-4 and lose a game, even if you don't fall across, I think you can understand that sounds ridiculous, and it is as ridiculous as it sounds. That just does not happen. And I think some of it is they had some untimely turnovers, some sloppy passes in the fourth quarter. And then for Syracuse to get an unreleasable 2-minute penalty with about 2.5 minutes remaining in the game when you're down by 2, that is a dream scenario, especially considering they were winning literally every faceoff. So unreleasable means even if you score, the penalty does not get released. You go back to the faceoff circle, you're still on a man up. And they got an opportunity to tie the game, and they didn't cash in on that. And honestly, it felt like they might win the game when that penalty was handed out in regulation, just based on kind of my thought process of, all right, if they score once, maybe you have 1:30 left, which they did, to score again after a faceoff, and they just didn't cash in there. So just a couple missed chances in timely situations, which has been a little bit of a theme. Now, it's still just February, and I think it's overreacting to say that, this team is over and done with. They have no chance of making the championship weekend or anything like that. Like, that's the beauty of playing a tough schedule, is they're going to be in a lot of close games that have a lot of meaning to it. And I felt like last year's team got better and better in crunch time situations. And there was some hope that, okay, maybe now you're all juniors or a lot of experienced guys. You're more experienced than other teams. This would be a year that they would sort of get rid of that narrative. And the second halves of the last two games just haven't been great.
You point out the fact that it's early. We should point out that, neither one of these were conference losses, right? So, yeah. I mean, everything is still in front of them, but it does make you kind of take a step back and reassess things. And I wonder, the players must be looking themselves in the mirror as well. Do you think this can ultimately be a good thing? Can they turn this little hiccup into a good thing here moving forward, that, maybe it grounded them? Maybe they were reading their press clippings a little bit that they're number 2 in the country. Could it be a blessing in disguise that they got tripped up?
Yeah, maybe. I think they are a very close-knit group that has a lot of good player leadership. So maybe this calls for like a player meeting type of situation, and let's get together and make sure that we're not looking past anyone. Because you could even point to like the Vermont game in the second half. They didn't really play their best and looked a little sloppy in that game. So I think it's easy, given how the games have gone in recent years. They've had way more talent than a lot of these lower level teams on their schedule. And I don't think Harvard was a bad team, of course, but that's a team that you shouldn't lose to at home, especially when you win 28 faceoffs, especially when you start out 5-0. But as far as like the press clippings and stuff like that, I do think it plays a factor that, Harvard is not, no one's talking about Harvard men's lacrosse on Boston Sports Talk Radio today. Like, right. Syracuse men's lacrosse is the only program that is talked about, maybe outside of like Johns Hopkins and Maryland and a couple others. So, these players are being interviewed as much or more than anyone in the country if you go to Syracuse. And we're sitting here talking about, there's people in our chat, and that's the beauty of Syracuse lacrosse. It's a great fan base. But I do think there's more of a spotlight on a Syracuse lacrosse player than, say, a Harvard lacrosse player. So it makes sense that some of these crunch time situations, they're maybe playing a little bit tight. And it does seem like they're playing a little bit tight.
All right, let's touch on the women's squad now. We'll get to women's basketball in a second, but women's lacrosse, they had their hands full going on the road to, the number 2 ranked team in the country in North Carolina. Just your thoughts on where they are. Came up short over the weekend, but, they were playing one of the nation's elite.
Yeah, I think my expectations for the women's team going in were lower than the men's team, like going into the season. So if you would have told me tough 2-game stretches for both these teams, that there would be one win and it'd be from the women's team, I would have been kind of surprised. I think the win over Maryland was a very solid win.
Sure.
UNC was always going to be a tough game. Now they turn around and play Northwestern on Tuesday night, so tomorrow night at home. That's going to be a tough game. I'm just curious, can they stay kind of in a 2 to 3 goal game with Northwestern and prove that they can hang with them? Because I do think this is a young team they have this year. So the expectations aren't maybe quite as high, or shouldn't be quite as high as they have been, but it's a very talented women's team. And I think once they're clicking, they have just as much talent as they've had in previous years. It's just they're playing a lot of players that are not a ton of experience on the field together and have not been out there a ton in college situations.
All right, so we knew that the SU women's basketball team had their hands full with back-to-back games against ranked opponents, UNC here. Then they had to go on the road and take on Duke. The UNC game certainly was a lot closer than the Duke game. Any takeaways from this 2-game stretch against ranked opponents?
Yeah, it's really been a tough 4-game stretch, too, because they had that West Coast swing in the 2 games before it, lost to Stanford. I thought they played maybe their best game of the season at Cal, which was like a week ago. Then against UNC, they did some very nice things in the third quarter. And again, this is a team that fights incredibly hard. They're always playing hard for Coach Jack. It just feels like they're a couple plays short each and every time they go up against UNC or a Duke or a top 25 level team. And then yesterday, Duke has just not been a good matchup for a Coach Jack era team yet. I mean, they have not scored more than 50 points against Duke in 3 games now. And that's kind of what Duke does to everyone. So the Blue Devils have just thrashed every quad 3, quad 4 opponent this year, and Syracuse was a quad 3 game for them last year, and they were coming off 2 losses. I just knew going in it was going to be a tough matchup. now you turn to 2 very winnable games at home, which is nice that after a very tough stretch, they come back home, and there's a lot to play for this week.
A lot to play for. We talk about the men's team taking on NC State and needing a win to qualify for the ACC tournament. Women are in a similar boat, right? They've got Pittsburgh on Thursday that, you win, you take care of business. All is well when it comes to the ACC tournament. You lose, though, and now you've got a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, and Pitt is trending up. They just beat Clemson, so that's a pretty solid win for them. They now have 4 wins in the league like Syracuse. But yeah, if you win this game, you've clinched your spot in Greensboro on Thursday night. If you beat Pitt at home, which is still a game that I think going in, you feel like you should win, given how Syracuse has played this year and how Pittsburgh has played this year. They do have a tremendous post player, and that has given the Orange some fits recently. But Maria Gokting for UNC basically single-handedly gave UNC a heavy lead in the second and third quarters, the way that she was able to just consistently catch it deep, underneath the basket, and get some easy buckets that way. So how they defend the post against Pittsburgh will be important. And then, even if you lose to Pitt, Miami is on the West Coast right now, and the Orange have the tiebreaker over the Hurricanes. They also have 4 wins in conference play, so it's Pitt, Miami, Syracuse fighting for one spot, essentially. And Miami could easily just lose to Stanford and Cal, and then Syracuse is probably in a good spot to still squeak into the tournament. But that's what we were talking about earlier. You don't want to backdoor your way into this and hope that, it's just counting on another team to lose. You just want to take care of business. And frankly, you should take care of business this week when you're talking about Pitt and BC are 2 winnable games at home.
Yeah, and I think that's how most people feel about the men's team as well. You beat NC State at home on Wednesday, and you should be able to go out and beat them. As NC State came up with a big win over Wake Forest, 4th best team in the conference.
Humble brag.
I'm sorry.
Let's not do that conversation
Humble
again.
brag. I was in a chat with Atan and Eric over the weekend about the thing, and we were looking at all the scenarios for the ACC tournament, and I said, "You're freaking Syracuse University. You go out and win these games.
Yeah."
You don't backdoor. You're not looking for, I hope this team loses to get into the tournament. You're freaking Syracuse.
Yeah.
Go beat NC State.
Take care of business.
Yeah.
Especially at home, too, for both these teams. Yeah. Right.
Just get it done.
Yeah.
Wednesday, Thursday, win both games. Bing, bang, boom. There you go. All right, Tim. Great stuff. Appreciate you coming on. We're going to take a time. Why do you have a confused look at it?
I don't know. Bing, bang, boom. I don't know.
You didn't like that? All right.
Just seemed weird coming
You
from
never
you.
give them any breaks.
Just win the game. That was the point.
Bing, bang, boom.
Okay. Just get it done.
Can we make shirts?
You can do whatever you
Can we
want.
make
I
orange?
feel like you have said weirder stuff before, and Steve just lets it pass.
Well,
But,
that's,
I always let it go.
That's
Yeah.
his problem. Bing, bang, boom. Orange Nation.
Phone line's open.
Hashtag Bing, bang, boom. Make it trend on Twitter.
We'll take a timeout. Back after this on ESPN Radio.